Oh hi, next video. So carrying on from the last one, speaking about Devadatta and the discrepancy of authentic Buddhist texts towards Devadatta. So I'd like to move on to the next subject. Regarding the authenticity of the foundation of Buddhism, everyone agrees that the oldest Buddhist texts are the Pali texts which came out of Sri Lanka. They were, just to put this in the picture, they were written 300 years after Buddha died. 300 years. I mean, I'll probably be dead when I'm 70. I'm 50 now. I don't know what age you are, but think about how old you are, and then say 300 years. So 300 years of oral tradition passed before the Sri Lankan monks wrote down the Pali text. Just please be aware that the Sinhalese monks, the Ceylon monks, the Sri Lankan monks, they didn't even speak the same language as Buddha spoke. Buddha spoke Pali Magadha. The Sri Lankans come from southern India, as opposite ends of the country. They claim to speak Sinhala now. I don't know what language they claim to have spoken 2,000 years ago, but it's opposite ends of the country. And India's not a little country. India's about the size of Europe. And between Bihar and in the north of India and Sri Lanka, there's thousands of different ethnic groups and thousands of miles and thousands of different languages. So the fact that the Sri Lankans wrote the Pali texts 300 years after Buddha died, it wasn't their language. They had to. They didn't even understand. It wasn't their language. Opposite end of the country, and 300 years later. So the authenticity and the accuracy of the founding texts of Buddhism is very questionable. So it's not at all a science. It's more like an art. And as we know in art, there is many things that have to be taken as faith. So the Pali text can't be proven to be authentic. It's an object of faith to accept them, in the same way that Muslims accept the Quran and Christians accept the Bible. I would suggest that it's an article of faith to accept the validity of the Pali Canon, the oldest Buddhist texts. Part of the text that Sri Lankans wrote, I can't remember what it's called, but when I lived in Thailand, when I was a monk in Thailand, this book was accepted as part of the Holy Pali Canon. But it's essentially a history of Sri Lanka. There's the big book and the small book, the Maha book and the something book. But if you read it, it is very racist against the Tamils in India, and it basically says that Buddha gave the Sinhalese authority to kick the Tamils out of Sri Lanka, and that the Tamils are inferior, and they're a challenge to the true Dhamma. And as I said, it's a very mythical legend book that's very, very far-fetched, but yet this is part of the authentic ancient Pali Canon, and it's a glorified history through it's a very racist book, and it's part of the Pali Canon. So just to be aware of that. If I remember it, I'll say the name, but I've forgotten offhand. Another thing, there's an English scholar. He actually could read. He actually could, like some people, they can speak more than one language, so they can read the newspapers of what's going on in other countries, so they can say, this is what's going on. Well, this guy, he could read and write, the language that Buddha spoke. He actually could. If there was newspapers from that time, he could read the newspapers, whereas you and I would have to depend on translations. But he actually could read, and he's called Richard Gombrich. He was the professor of Sanskrit language at least 2 universities. Pali comes from Sanskrit. Pali is a brother language of Sanskrit. So if you can read Sanskrit, you can read Pali. Richard Gombrich says that Richard Gombrich, this is an important point, and he's not the only one that says it, but I want to give you an example of what Richard Gombrich and other people say. And my monk friend, who was a monk for 14 years and who read and write, who could read and speak fluent Pali, he lived in Sri Lanka for a few years, he says the same. Richard Gombrich says that, for example, in English language we have a saying that if you're really hungry, a way of saying I'm hungry is, oh, you know what, I could murder an Indian, or I could kill a Chinese, or I'm going to attack a Bengali. And what it means is you want to eat an Indian meal, you want to eat a Bengali meal, you want to eat a Chinese meal. It doesn't mean you're going to kill or you're going to be violent, but the words that you use appear to be violent. I want to kill a Chinese. But Richard Gombrich, and my old monk friend who did speak actually fluent Pali, but talking about Richard Gombrich, he says that many of the translators, they translated literally, that Buddha said, I want to kill a Chinese. Well, so they didn't translate it as Buddha said he was hungry. They translated it literally. Buddha said, I am going to kill a Chinese. And because of the literal translation of how the texts have been translated, people have just misunderstood many Buddhist teachings. Buddha was actually making jokes. He was using using colloquialisms that in that context everyone understood, but now they've been completely misunderstood. And as I've mentioned before, the only one I can think of just now, one of the major teachings that have been misconstrued is the Paccekasamuppada, the 12 dependent steps of origination. Apparently, if you look at the context in which Buddha gave talk about this, he was saying actually it wasn't true, it was a joke. It was based on he was saying these 12 steps, this is what you believe in ancient Indian astrology, ancient Hindu astrology, and it's erroneous, it's wrong. But the Buddhists have misinterpreted what Buddha was saying. Gombrich also says Buddha used a lot of humour. I can't think, but his humour has been misinterpreted as well, and what he said was taken literally. So hold on. Yeah, that's it. That's all the things. But just to say, my monk friend who spoke, he was a monk for 14 years in Sri Lanka, in Thailand, and in Burma also. He had a gift for languages, and because he says there's a whole other depth. There's a whole other depth to Pali language, which until you study it, you're unaware of the poetry and the hidden depths. But you have to study it for a few years. But once you study it, you can become aware that there's a whole other depth of meaning within the Pali that when it gets translated, you just don't get it. You just miss it. This monk friend, I'll tell you a true story. When he lived in the jungles of Sri Lanka, he was surrounded by elephants and monkeys and stuff like that. You can believe this or not, I do believe it. He said, because eventually he learned to speak monkey language. He says the monkeys use their teeth. They do that, and he basically, after years, he could recognise, and he was able to communicate with the monkeys. What he says one of them. Oh, it's a bit adult, so. But what he said one of the monkeys offered itself to him to have sex with. No, it showed him his anus, which he had noticed, which what the monkeys do before they have sex. But not only did this monk friend, not only did he speak good Pali and fluent Thai, and he spoke a little bit Shan in Burma. He didn't speak Burmese, he spoke a little bit Shan, which is quite similar to Thai. But he had a gift for languages. But he said, as well as monkey language. But that's what he said. But he did say that if you learn Pali, there's a whole other depth that is not you don't get if you rely on translations. So there's all these aspects of Buddhism which are very interesting, and if one looks into them, they can kind of strengthen one's faith. And you know the old thing about the security of insecurity, the wisdom of not knowing, the wisdom of ignorance. So it's all these things. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.